Marcus Reid knocked on the yellow door for what had to be the 300th time. A grocery bag in one hand, a bottle of blood pressure medicine in the other. 6:15. Same. As always. He heard footsteps that didn't belong to Miss Odessa. Sharp heels on hardwood. Nothing like her slow, careful shuffle. The door opened. A woman in a tailored navy coat stood in the frame, a phone pressed to her ear mid-sentence. The sentence died before it finished. Marcus knew that face. He'd stared at it once before, across a conference table, while she read a letter with his name at the top and her signature at the bottom. Priya Okafor, the CEO who had fired him 14 months ago, standing in his neighbor's doorway like she'd always belonged there. Neither of them moved. Before we go further, guess who's standing on that porch tomorrow morning? You will not see it coming. If stories about quiet dignity, hidden pasts, and justice that takes its time to arrive are the kind that stay with you, consider subscribing. Every week, we bring you people who lost everything and rebuilt it anyway. Now, back to 6 weeks earlier, when none of this had happened yet. 6 weeks earlier, Cedar Falls still had that late summer smell, cut grass, and asphalt cooling. After a hot day, Marcus Reid managed the loading dock at a regional distribution warehouse. On the east side of town, the kind of job where nobody asked what you used to be, only whether you could lift 60 pounds and show up on time. He could do both. Every day. It wasn't the life anyone would have guessed for him. Not from the way he talked, measured, exact, like a man who used to write reports for a living. Not from the way he read the label on every box before he signed for it, out of habit more than duty. Nobody at the warehouse asked. He never offered. His daughter Zoe was 8, gap-toothed, always humming some song only she could hear. Every morning, he walked her 4 blocks to Lincoln Elementary. Every morning, on the way back, he stopped at the yellow house on Willow Street. It started with a kite. Zoe's kite had snagged in Odessa Marsh's gutter, and instead of yelling down from her porch, 78 years old and still sharp as a tack, Odessa had come outside with a broom and knocked it loose herself, laughing the whole time. Marcus came to apologize. He stayed for lemonade. That was 5 months ago. He hadn't missed a morning since. Odessa lived alone. Her husband had passed 9 years back. Her granddaughter ran some big company 2 states over, too busy for anything but a Sunday phone call that never lasted past 10 minutes. She manages fine, Odessa always said, waving off help right before she asked for it. Sideways. A jar she couldn't open. A porch bulb that needed changing. A prescription she'd rather not drive for anymore. Marcus never made her ask twice. You spoil me, she told him one morning, watching him check the batteries in her smoke detector. You feed my kid cornbread every week, he said. I think that makes us even. On Saturdays, the 3 of them sat at Odessa's kitchen table, and she told stories about a company her son had built from a single warehouse into something with its name on buildings downtown. A granddaughter who ran it now. Too far. Too much like her father had been. She calls every Sunday, Odessa said once, stirring sugar into her tea. 10 minutes, if I'm lucky. Works harder than anybody I ever knew. For what? I keep asking her. Come see the house. I'm not getting younger. Marcus nodded along the way you nod a story that isn't about you. He didn't know anything about corporate ladders anymore. Didn't want to. Whatever office his old life belonged to, he'd shut that door the day security walked him out of a building with his own name still on the parking sign. He never brought it up. Not to Odessa. Not to anyone in Cedar Falls. As far as this town was concerned, Marcus Reid had always worked a loading dock, and that suited him fine. Some nights, after Zoe fell asleep, Marcus went through the boxes still stacked in the hall closet. Leftovers from a move he'd never quite finished unpacking. He was digging for tape one night when his hand caught something stiff and laminated wedged behind an old folder. His own face looked back at him, younger, clean-shaven, a company logo stamped in the corner. Okafor Nutrition Group. Underneath, in small block letters, Senior Quality Assurance Engineer. He sat very still on the hallway floor, the badge warm from his own grip. It came back the way these things always do. Not slow, All at once. 9 years at Okafor Nutrition. The last 2 running quality control on the infant formula line. The night he'd found the allergen testing results that didn't match the batch logs. A cross. Contamination flag that should have stopped an entire shipment before it left the plant. The report he filed. The meeting where his supervisor's face went very still and very careful. The weeks after, when files he'd never touched turned up flagged under his login. The termination letter, a signature at the bottom that meant nothing to him then. Just a name. Priya Okafor, printed neat above a title. He remembered standing in the parking lot with a cardboard box of desk photos, watching. People he'd trained for years suddenly find their phones very interesting. He remembered telling himself he'd fight it. Then remembering the retainer and employment. Lawyer wanted up front, and Zoe's daycare, and a mortgage, and how fighting a company with lawyers on payroll is a luxury built for people who still have savings. Nobody had asked for his side. Nobody, apparently, had needed to. A signature had done all the talking required. He'd taken the warehouse job 6 months later, after his last unemployment check cleared, and the interviews for quality control roles kept circling back to the same question. Can you explain the gap in your employment and the reason for departure? A question with no good answer that didn't sound like an excuse. He turned the badge over once in his hand, felt the sharp edges bite his palm, then dropped it into the kitchen trash under the coffee grounds, where it wouldn't catch Zoe's eye in the morning. He didn't sleep much that night, but when 6 o'clock came, he made coffee, packed Zoe's lunch, walked her to school, and turned toward Willow Street exactly the way he always did. Some mornings start like every other morning. This one wouldn't stay that way. Priya Okafor hadn't planned on being in Cedar Falls that morning. A supplier audit had fallen through at the last minute, her operations chief citing a scheduling conflict that sounded thinner than he probably meant it to. Rather than sit at her desk rereading the same forecast she'd gotten in her car and driven the 90 minutes to her grandmother's house. The way she kept promising herself she'd do more often and never quite managed. She let herself in with her spare key, calling out as she crossed the hall, phone still pressed to her ear, mid-sentence to her general counsel about a supplier contract that suddenly stopped matching the second the knock came. Soft, familiar, timed to the second, though she had no way of knowing that. She opened the door without thinking. The man on the porch went rigid. She went rigid half a beat after him. Marcus Reid, groceries in one hand, medicine in the other, standing on her grandmother's. Welcome Matt like he belonged there, because as it turned out, he did. Priya? Odessa's voice floated in from the kitchen, delighted. Is that Marcus? Oh good, you two were finally meeting properly. Neither of them answered right away. Marcus's eyes found Priya's and held there. A silent question passed between them faster than either could put words to it. How much does she know? How much do I say? Not here. Not like this. Odessa appeared in the hallway, wiping flour off her hands, beaming like she'd engineered the whole moment herself. Marcus, this is my granddaughter, Priya, the one I never shut up about. Priya, this is the young man who's kept me company every single morning for months. Don't know what I'd do without him. Priya started and stopped. We've crossed paths, Marcus said, even unhurried, the same voice he used to talk Zoe. Down from Tantrum, small town, Pads Cross. Priya's eyes flicked back to him, something unreadable moving behind them. Then she found her footing. Right. A few times, actually. The lie came out smoother than she expected, though her pulse hadn't slowed a bit. Odessa looked between them, satisfied, entirely unaware she was standing at the center of something neither of them had words for yet. Well, good. I wanted you two to meet properly for ages. She turned back toward the stove. Marcus, you're staying for dinner. Both of you. I made too much chicken, and I refuse to eat it alone a third night this week. It wasn't a question. It never was with Odessa. Priya opened her mouth to decline. She had 4 hours of work waiting back at the office, say, call with the compliance team, a dozen reasons to leave. None of them came out. Sure, she said instead. I'd like that. Marcus didn't look at her again until Odessa turned her back. When he did, it wasn't anger. On his face, it was something more careful. A man recalculating in real time exactly how much ground he was standing on. Dinner ran 2 hours longer than Priya had planned for. Every minute felt like walking across ice she couldn't be sure would hold. Odessa did most of the talking the way she always did. Stories about Marcus fixing her porch step, about Zoe's drawings taped to the fridge, about a church bake sale where his cornbread outsold 3 other tables combined. "So what is it you do exactly?" Zoe asked at one point, legs swinging under a chair entirely. Without malice. "Grandma Odessa says you work in an office." "I do," Priya said, and felt Marcus's eyes on her without looking up. "Paperwork mostly. Boring stuff." It wasn't a lie so much as it was everything true, left unsaid. Marcus steered the conversation elsewhere. A joke about Zoe's spelling test, a question for Odessa about her garden, and Priya found herself grateful for it in a way she didn't examine too closely. She drove home that night with both hands tight on the wheel, replaying every second of it. By the time she reached her apartment, she'd already pulled up the personnel archive on her laptop, fingers hovering over the search bar a long moment before she typed the name. Reid, Marcus. Terminated. March. The file was thinner than she remembered signing off on. She read it twice. Falsification of quality control records. Termination for cause. Her own signature sat at the bottom of the recommendation, dated 14 months back, a decision she'd made in a 12-minute meeting with her operations chief, Wade Kessler, standing at her shoulder. Certain and urgent. The kind of certain that leaves no room for questions. She closed the laptop without reading further. It wasn't enough to build a conclusion on, not yet. She told herself that was the only reason her stomach felt the way it did. 3 streets from Odessa's house, Marcus was fielding a different kind of pressure. His shift supervisor had heard from someone at the diner that Marcus Reid had been seen having dinner with the Okafor family. Okafor, as in the name on the nutrition plant that half the town's parents shop for at the grocery store. "Anything I should know about?" his supervisor asked the next morning, arms crossed in the office doorway. "No," Marcus said. "Just neighbors." His supervisor let it go, but Marcus noticed the man watching him a little longer than usual. The rest of the week. A small thing, barely worth mentioning. And yet he found himself replaying it anyway, the old instinct kicking in, the one that had learned exactly how fast a good reputation turns on a rumor nobody bothers to check. Priya started finding reasons to drive to Cedar Falls. She told herself it was overdue, that Odessa deserved more than 10 minutes on a Sunday call, and that much was true. But she couldn't pretend, not fully, that some part of the drive wasn't shaped around the hour. Marcus usually came by. She watched him more than she meant to. The way he crouched to Zoe's eye level instead of talking down at her. The way he rehung Odessa's storm door without being asked. Checking the hinges twice before calling it finished. None of it matched 2 words sitting in his personnel file. For cause. One evening, clearing plates while Odessa dozed in her recliner and Zoe colored at the table, Priya found herself standing close enough to Marcus that she had to lower her voice. "Do you hate me?" she asked, not looking at him, hands still in the dishwater. He didn't pretend not to understand. "I don't have room left for that. Not with an 8-year. Old to raise." It wasn't forgiveness. It landed harder than an accusation would have. "That's not an answer," Priya said. "It's the only one I've got right now." He dried a plate, set it down, met her eyes for the first time all evening. "You want a different one? You're going to have to earn it." She thought about that sentence the whole drive home, turning it over the way she used to turn over a supplier report, looking for the one line that would tell her whether the whole thing still held weight or whether it had already failed somewhere she couldn't see yet. By the time she reached the office parking lot the next morning, she'd made a decision. She found her assistant, Nadia Grant, at her desk before either of them had taken their coats off. "I need everything on the Reid termination," Priya said. "Every email, every draft of that complaint, anything that touched Wade Kessler's inbox in the 2 weeks before it happened. Don't route it through legal. Bring it straight to me." Nadia's hand went still on her keyboard half a second too long. "Everything," Priya repeated, and something in her voice made clear this wasn't a request. Meant to be questioned. Understood, Nadia said, though it took her a long moment before she could make herself start typing. Nadia Grant had told herself for 14 months that silence was the responsible choice. She had a son with asthma and a mortgage that didn't care about her conscience. And Wade Kessler had made it very clear in the careful, deniable way powerful men make things clear that certain emails were better left unmentioned. She kept a copy anyway, told herself it was for her own protection, in case anyone ever asked the right questions. Nobody ever had. Until now. She found Priya in her office after 6, the building mostly emptied out, and set a folder on the desk without a word. What is this? Everything you asked for, Nadia said, and one thing you didn't. Priya opened the folder. On top sat a printed email chain, dated 4 months before. Marcus's termination. Wade Kessler to 2 junior quality technicians. Subject line stripped of anything incriminating. Body text anything but. Instructions to shorten the allergen cross-contamination hold time on the formula line by 6 hours to hit a shipping deadline before a major retail contract renewal. A note near the bottom flagging that quality assurance, Marcus's office, would need to be, in Wade's words, managed. 2 pages later, a second thread. Marcus's original report, the one that got him fired, flagging the exact contamination risk Wade had ordered shortened. Beneath it, an internal message from Wade to HR, drafted the same week, laying groundwork for a falsification complaint against the engineer who was, quote, becoming a liability to the timeline. Priya read it 3 times before she trusted herself to speak. He never falsified anything, she said quietly. He found what Wade was hiding. I should have said something sooner, Nadia said, voice shaking now that it was finally out. I was scared. I know exactly what happens to people who cross Wade Kessler. Priya looked up at her, and whatever fury had been building in her chest for the last 10 minutes, none of it landed on Nadia. You just did the hard part, she said. That's not nothing. Nadia nodded, wiped her eyes, let out a breath she seemed to have been holding over a year. Priya sat with the folder long after Nadia left, the office dark except for her desk lamp. The full shape of what she'd done finally visible to her for the first time. Not a mistake. Not an oversight. A man's entire career taken apart on purpose, with her signature at the bottom of the paperwork. She thought about Marcus crouched at Zoe's eye level. The porch railing. The hinges. Checked twice. She thought about you're going to have to earn it, and understood, sitting alone at 9 o'clock at night, that an apology delivered here, across a desk with lawyers, eventually in the room, would mean nothing compared to one delivered honestly, face to the man who'd spent 14 months rebuilding a life she had helped tear down. She called him before she let herself think better of it. I need to see you, she said when he picked up. Not at Odessa's. Just you. A pause on the line, long enough that she wondered if he'd hang up. Tomorrow, Marcus said finally. After Zoe's at school, Wade Kessler did not like being summoned to a board session with no agenda circulated in advance, and he liked it even less walking in to find Priya seated at the head of the table, with a folder in front of her and Nadia standing quietly by the door. What's this about? He asked, taking his seat with the easy confidence of a man who'd never once considered the ground beneath him might not hold. Priya didn't waste time. She laid the printed emails across the table, letting each board member read in silence before she spoke. 14 months ago, Wade ordered a reduction in allergen hold times on the infant formula, line to protect a shipping deadline. Marcus Reid flagged it exactly as his job required. 3 weeks later, Wade began building a termination case against him, not for the contamination risk, for a falsification claim that never happened. The room went very still. This is absurd, Wade said too fast. You're taking the word of a disgruntled ex-employee and turning it into a conspiracy. I'm taking the word of your own emails, Priya said, and slid the last page across the table. Written under your name. Sent from your account. Time-stamped before his termination was ever discussed. Wade's composure cracked for the first time, a flush climbing from his collar. He looked at Nadia, and something in his expression made her flinch, though she held her ground. "You want to talk about disgruntled?" Wade said, low now, aimed at Priya alone. "How's the board going to feel when they hear their CEO's been having dinner with the man she fired at her own grandmother's house every week for a month? How's that going to read in the press, Priya? Careful who you're trying to expose." The threat landed. For a moment, nobody in the room moved. Then the conference room door opened. Marcus stepped in, still in his work jacket, a folder of his own tucked under one arm. He hadn't been invited. Priya had told him where and when, and he'd made his own decision about whether to come. "I have the original quality report," Marcus said, setting it beside Wade's emails without raising his voice. "Filed the same week as the hold time change. Every data point matches what your own technicians reported before someone told them to stop asking questions." Wade's mouth opened and nothing came out. "You build a case against the one man who did his job," Priya said, standing now, addressing the room rather than Wade alone. "I signed off on it without asking enough questions, and I own that. But the record is in front of you. I'd like the board to vote on Wade Kessler's immediate suspension, pending a full internal and external safety review." The vote, when it came, was not close. Wade was escorted from the building within the hour, his access revoked before he reached the parking lot. Marcus stood by the window afterward, watching the afternoon light fall across a company that had once been the center of his whole life, and felt something in his chest loosen for the first time in 14 months. Not triumph exactly, the quiet relief of finally being believed. Priya crossed the room and stood beside him, close enough their shoulders nearly touched. "Thank you," she said, "for coming." "I didn't do it for you," Marcus said, though there was no edge in it now. "I did it because it was true." "I know," Priya said. "That's exactly why it mattered. If this story is landing for you, this is usually the part one asks you to consider staying with us. Tell us in the comments which moment hit hardest. Like the video if you want more stories like this one, and share it with somebody who needs a reminder that the truth eventually finds its way to the light. The internal investigation moved fast once it started. Within a week, Wade's suspension became a formal termination. The safety board opened a full audit of every formula batch shipped in the last 18 months. 2 outside labs confirmed Marcus's original findings, down to the decimal. Priya called a full staff meeting on a Thursday morning. The company auditorium filled past capacity for the first time anyone could remember. She didn't read from notes. 14 months ago, this company fired a man for telling the truth, she said, her voice steady though her hands weren't. Marcus Reid found a safety failure that could have hurt children, reported it exactly as he was trained to, and was punished for it by someone, protecting his own numbers instead of our customers. "I signed that termination. I own that mistake publicly in front of all of you." She looked out at the room, then found Marcus standing near the back, arms crossed. Zoe's drawing, the one of their kitchen table, folded in his jacket pocket, though nobody in that room knew that detail but him. "I'm offering Mr. Reid his position back at a senior level, reflecting the 14 months this company owes him, full back pay, and a formal correction to his record. But more than that, I'm asking the board to make what he did policy. Every safety flag gets independent review before termination is even considered. We don't bury the people who tell us the truth. Not again." The applause that followed wasn't performative. It came from people who'd worked beside Marcus for years and never understood why he vanished. From technicians who'd quietly wondered if raising a flag of their own would cost them the same way. For the first time in 14 months, the answer to that question had changed in front of all of them. Afterward, in the quiet of the emptying hallway, Marcus found Priya near the elevators. "I'm not saying yesterday," he said. "I need time. 14 months doesn't undo itself over one good meeting." "I know," Priya said. "Take whatever time you need." He nodded. Neither of them moved toward the door. That evening they drove to Willow Street separately and arrived within minutes of each other, standing on the porch under the same light where all of this had started, neither one performing anything anymore. I think it's time we told her the truth, Priya said quietly, hand resting on the doorframe. Olive, it. Marcus looked at the yellow door, then at her. Yeah, he said. I think you're right. Odessa listened to the whole story without interrupting, which for Odessa was its own kind of miracle. She heard about the report, the firing, the 14 months of silence, the dinner. That started as an accident and turned into a performance neither of them had planned on giving. When they finished, she sat back in her recliner, quiet long enough that Priya started to worry. Then she laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her, one hand pressed her chest. So this whole time, she said, you two have been sitting at my table lying to an old woman's face about how you met? Not lying exactly, Priya started. Lying, Odessa said, delighted rather than offended. Bless you both. I've been telling everyone at church what a lovely coincidence it was, my granddaughter and the nice young man from down the street. She shook her head, still smiling. Well, I suppose it's still a lovely coincidence, just a different kind than I thought. In the weeks that followed, the evenings at Odessa's house stopped needing a script. Priya showed up without warning texts, simply because she wanted to. Marcus stopped watching, his words so carefully around her. What was left, once the pretending fell away, was something neither of them expected to find on a stranger's porch in Cedar Falls. Two people knocked down by the same mistake, slowly learning to trust the ground again. Some evenings they didn't talk about the company at all. Priya helped Zoe with a science project on bridges, laughing when she realized halfway through she was explaining load distribution to an 8-year-old the same way she used to explain it to junior engineers. Zoe, who never needed the whole story to know a good thing when she saw one, drew a new picture one evening and taped it to Odessa's fridge without asking anyone's permission. For figures around table, Marcus, Zoe, Odessa, and new to the drawing, Priya, her stick figure hand linked with Marcus's. Odessa noticed it first and said nothing, just smiled into her tea. Priya noticed it second, and her throat went tight in a way she hadn't expected over a crayon drawing. Marcus noticed at last, drying his hands on a dish towel. When he saw it, he didn't say anything either. He crossed the kitchen, reached for Priya's hand where it rested on the counter, and simply held it. No declaración. Nothing that needed saying out loud after everything they'd already survived to get here. Okay, Marcus asked quietly. Okay, Priya said. Marcus started back at Okafor Nutrition Group on a Monday in late November, 3 weeks after the board vote in a newly created role. Director of Quality Assurance Reporting. Directly to the CEO. He negotiated one condition into the offer that Priya hadn't expected and immediately agreed to. Every safety concern flagged by any employee at any level would go to an independent panel before it could ever reach a termination discussion. On his first morning, Marcus still stopped at the yellow door on Willow Street, the way he had for months. Bread in one hand, a small bag from the pharmacy in the other. This time, when he knocked, Priya opened the door. Already dressed for the office, a second travel mug of coffee waiting on the counter behind her, made exactly the way she'd learned. He took it. Morning, she said, stepping aside to let him in. Morning, he said, and neither of them needed to perform anything for the woman waiting at the kitchen table anymore. They ate breakfast together that day the way they had a dozen times before. Odessa, presiding over the table with her usual commentary. Zoe, narrating a dream about a talking dog. Sunlight coming in slow and gold through the window. Something had shifted, quiet and permanent, in the space between Marcus's chair and Priya's. Nobody announced it. Nobody needed to. Later, walking Zoe to school, Marcus felt his phone buzz. A text from Priya. 3 words. See you tonight. He smiled at his phone the way a man does when he isn't trying to hide it anymore. Zoe glanced up at him and grinned like she already understood something he was only just letting himself believe. You're doing the smile again, she said. What smile? The one you didn't used to do. She said it simply, The way kids say the truest things without any weight attached, and kept walking like she hadn't just seen straight through him. Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. He matched his stride to hers, and for the first time in almost a year and a half, the walk to school felt like exactly what it was. An ordinary morning in an ordinary town with nothing left to hide from anyone. They hadn't gone looking for any of it. Not the reports, not the boardroom, not the quiet. Mornings that turned into something neither of them had a name for yet. They had only ever been looking out for a lonely old woman on Willow Street, showing up for her one ordinary morning at a time. Some victories don't announce themselves with headlines. Sometimes they just look like a door opening and the right person finally standing on the other side of it.